Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel. And today we've got something a little bit different for you guys. If you guys have been sticking around my channel for a while, you know that I like doing videos where I just kind of rattle off a bunch of movies that I watched that I never got a chance to review. And this week the new release was Cry Macho and a couple others, and to be honest, I had no interest whatsoever in seeing that movie. So I figured I'd just talk about a bunch of stuff that I do want to talk about that I have not yet talked about up until this point. So these movies will be in no particular order. I've liked some of them, I've loved some of them, I've hated some of them, I've been lukewarm on others. So this is going to be a variety list of a bunch of movies that I did watch. So let's get started right away with the first one on this list, which is Nobody, which came out at the beginning of this year, starring Bob Odenkirk, and it's like a John Wick type movie. And I will say that the action in this movie and the direction of that action is phenomenal. I think Bob Odenkirk is brilliant in this movie. I think he is such an odd choice for an action type role like this, and that's what makes him so perfect in it. I do love the first half of this movie much more than the second half. The second half is all like the crazy action, all the explosions and all of that, and the warehouse scene at the end of the movie is really fun to see Christopher Lloyd, killing a bunch of people at the end of this movie. But I really like the first half and that focus on the family and that focus on the revenge and the story of it. I feel like that whole thing got lost. The family just kind of disappeared for the back half of this movie, and they just kind of appeared at the end of the movie like everything was just fine and all, and there were some just story elements that didn't line up well, but it was very entertaining in terms of the action side of things. I don't think this is nearly as good as like the John Wick movies, but as a fan of Bob Odenkirk, and if you guys are a fan of Bob Odenkirk and you're a fan of action and crazy fight scenes like the bus scene in this movie, then you'll probably enjoy it. Next up is Mortal Kombat. Yes, I did see this. Yes, I did watch it early, and I just, for some reason, I didn't do a review for this one. I could have sworn I did do a review, but apparently I didn't. And I'll say that the first like 10 minutes of this movie is incredible. All the stuff with Scorpion is awesome. I love every moment of that opening scene, and they actually released it on YouTube like a week before the movie came out or something like that, and it got me so pumped for this movie. But in general, the whole movie is kind of bland and boring and completely forgettable. Honestly, I didn't think it was terrible. I think it had some really fun beats of action that I remember, but for the most part, the main character was really just super uninteresting. And I think that's a bummer because you have a lot of rich characters in this universe. Although I don't play the video games of Mortal Kombat, I've heard a lot about it, and I've seen people play it, and I've seen the characters and the lore behind it, and it's really interesting. And the whole Scorpion thing was awesome, like I said. But then they focused on this character named Cole, and he was just kind of boring, and so it just kind of fell flat for me. And honestly, I wouldn't mind seeing a sequel because this movie does set up to leading up to the actual tournaments, the Mortal Kombat tournaments that the games are based off of. Because it's not in this movie for whatever reason, it's just weird. Next up is one of my favorite animated movies of the year. And this has been a pretty good year for animated movies, but this one was released on Netflix with the original name Connected. When I saw the trailer, I didn't think it looked all good, but it was finally released on Netflix this year, and it's called The Mitchells versus the Machines. And this movie is from I think either Lord and Miller produced or they directed this movie, I'm not sure. But that movie is so incredibly fun and inventive. I've had that much fun watching a movie this year than I did watching this one. It's just so funny, and the animation is vibrant. It's kind of like a mixture between 2D animation and 3D animation like Spider-Verse was, and so it just had a tone and feel to it that was just perfect for what I was looking for in an animated movie. And it was a complete surprise because I didn't think this movie was going to be any good, but upon watching it, I really related to the main character. If you guys don't know, I am a film student myself, and so this character wants to go to film school. She made a bunch of short films just with her phone and with her brother and her dog and all these really funny skits at the beginning of this movie, and it's about her road tripping with her dad and this storyline between her dad and her mother and her brother going all the way to drop her off in LA for her film school, and all of a sudden all these robots start taking over the world, and it's very funny. The dog is the highlight of this movie, and that loaf of bread joke is gold. Together is a very small independent movie that's on Hulu, starring Ed Helms and Patty Harrison, and it's a very sweet movie. It's kind of like it's a rom-com without the romance. I guess it's just a comedy. It's like a dramatic comedy about this character Ed Helms who really wants a baby, and so he hires a surrogate to carry the baby for him, and they form a sort of like friendship that kind of goes to the beat of a romantic comedy, if that makes sense, but it's not a romantic comedy. It's definitely they're a friendship that blossoms throughout this movie, and it leaves the question of their bond with this is kind of frowned upon in this type of world where, you're having a surrogate baby, because this baby is not going to be, raised by the mother that is, holding the baby the entire time for the pregnancy. It's just the baby's going to go with Ed Helms, and that's going to be it. But that connection and that relationship between these two characters is a really interesting one to explore, and is very cleverly written and very funny, and it just was a very sweet movie that the end of the movie left me just wanting more from these characters, because I fell in love with these characters by the end of it. It's one of those, independent movies where you watch and it has one of those endings where you're just kind of like, I can see people asking like, what was the point of the movie by the end of it? But for me, at least, it just left me wanting to just explore what these characters would do in my mind. And next up is one that I'm genuinely actually baffled, like Mortal Kombat, that I had not reviewed earlier this year. Cruella. I have the poster up right here. I loved Cruella. Honestly, it's one of my favorite movies of the year so far. Now it's on Disney Plus for free for everybody to watch, but I did get a chance to see this in theaters, and I honestly think this is my favorite of all the Disney live action movies, mainly because it doesn't feel like a Disney movie. It feels like the director just had a chance to make this fashion designer movie, and he just slapped the name Cruella on it and put it into the brand of Disney, and it just felt very fresh for Disney. It felt darker than other Disney movies, while also having that comedic elements that Disney movies have. And I think Emma Stone in this role is incredible. But the person who steals this show, even over Emma Stone, is Emma Thompson as the villainous character, and the twists and turns in this movie, and the twist in this movie that's, I won't spoil it in this video if you guys have not seen Cruella, but honestly, I left the theater kind of baffled that this movie really did surprise me. It's a little bit long. It's maybe like 10-15 minutes longer than it should have been, but honestly, it's just such a fun and entertaining movie to watch. The music and the soundtrack, although it can be a little heavy-handed at times, it's very, very good. I listened to the soundtrack for a couple weeks after this movie came out, and honestly, I'll probably, play it every once in a while again, just on my phone, just to, while I'm driving or something like that. It's just such a great soundtrack. It's such a great fun movie, and they greenlit a sequel to this movie, and I think Emma Stone is so perfect for this role, and she's one of my favorite actresses that I want to see her explore this role more and even dive deeper into the evil aspects of this character, because yes, she has some evil elements in this movie, but it's not full on Cruella that you see in the animated movie, and I think some people have issues with that, but it's about the growth of that character, and especially since we are getting a second movie, I hope we go even more into that direction. It's not like a Maleficent type way that they treated this character. This character has some moments where you think she's really going to a darker side of herself, and honestly, it's just a field day for Emma Stone and for the director to just have a lot of fun in this world. So I'm really looking forward to a sequel of this movie, and honestly, it's one of my favorites of the year. And yet another movie that I'm shocked that I did not review, although my brother's wedding was the weekend where this movie was released, so I didn't really get to watch it in its full glory until afterwards, and it's called Luca. It's the Pixar movie this year, and I'm generally shocked that I did not watch this one right when it came out, because I love Pixar. I have a video out, I'll link it in the description down below or in the iCard over here, of just, all the Pixar movies ranked. I did a video of that, I think last year. I'll need to update it after the next couple Pixar movies come up, but I've always kind of explored the idea that Pixar has an A team and a B team. Not that necessarily that the B team is bad, but that the A team is so incredibly high tier that it just blows everything else out of the water. And that's like, the Finding Nemos, the Monsters Inc., and the Inside Outs and Toy Stories of the world, the very high quality, all ages invited movies that Pixar makes that just have very heavy themes of importance and all these things, and Luca definitely has elements of that, but it's definitely the most small scale movie Pixar has ever made. It's about two characters, Luca and his friend, that they kind of formed this friendship with, and they just happen to be sea monsters, but they really want to buy a Vespa scooter. And that's the entire plot of the movie. They just want a scooter, and that's all their goal in this entire movie is just to get this scooter, and that's it. And so in terms of Pixar movies, yes, you have this cool little, sea monster world that you don't spend too much time in, but for the most part, they're just, two kids running around Italy having fun. I will say that the animation in this film is different than anything else Pixar has done. It feels more painter-like, and that is what I love when Pixar does. If you guys have not seen Pixar's short films, the collection of Spark shorts that they have on Disney Plus, they are all amazing. They all have different animation styles, which I really appreciate that in their short film department of Pixar, where they kind of, bring up and coming animation directors and writers and artists, and they have them, explore a little short film idea, and then eventually they'll move up in Pixar and be able to make their own feature film in the future. And I do think Luca was directed by somebody who did the short. I think it was the short about the kid in the stars or something like that. I'm not quite sure. I could be getting that wrong. But I like that Pixar, has these, short films that they can really mess with the type of animation style, and they can play with different directors and different story ideas, and eventually they'll bring them up to direct a feature film. I really love that idea. And honestly, Luca is, although it's not the greatest Pixar movie, it's definitely one of the higher end B tier movies for me. And so next up is probably the movie that I enjoyed the least out of everything on this list, except for the next one. I will say the next one is terrible. But this one, I will be talking about Space Jam 2: A New Legacy, starring LeBron James, and he was really, really trying so very hard to act and just could not whatsoever. Honestly, I do really enjoy the first Space Jam movie. I honestly think Michael Jordan is a serviceable actor in that film, and it's just a lot of fun. But this movie tries to be a smart and clever, take on corporate, filmmaking, even though this movie just ends up being a corporate dumpster fire. It tries to poke fun at the fact that the corporate heads of this movie wants to pop LeBron James in a bunch with all these different IPs. And what does this movie do? It pops LeBron James in with a bunch of different IPs. It's a hypocritical take on corporate's, movie making, and it just ends up being exactly what it's trying to make fun of, essentially. And it just falls completely flat by the end of it. Alright, next up is my least favorite movie of everything we've talked about so far on this list, and that is Hugh Jackman and Rebecca Ferguson's Reminiscence. This movie is terrible. I did not enjoy this movie whatsoever. It has a clever idea with the whole thing where, this world is post-apocalyptic and you can go back and people are addicted to their memories because it's the only source of happiness that they have left. But this movie is like an investigative noir romance movie, which I think it could have worked, and on paper, I guess, sure, maybe, but honestly, the romance was so dull and bad that at the setup of this movie that I just could not care about these characters whatsoever. And this whole thing is based on this romance between Hugh Jackman and Rebecca Ferguson, and you just further into it this further mystery of her disappearance, and you don't care about her in the first place because their whole introduction was so incredibly rushed. It fell so flat. Nobody had anything to do in this movie. Hugh Jackman, just did his Hugh Jackman thing, and he's great, and I guess the performances in this film are not necessarily bad. They were just given nothing to do with. Like Rebecca Ferguson, she had nothing to work with here, and especially Thandie Newton and Cliff Curtis. They were just hollow characters. There was nothing interesting about this movie. The intrigue and the mystery just kind of bored me. I fell asleep when I watched it in theaters, and so I went back and I watched it on HBO Max, and it did not impress me after watching it for a second time, staying awake this time for the full thing. So this movie did not work on almost every single level. One of the worst of the year. Alright, and next up is Coda, the Apple TV Plus movie that premiered at Sundance. And if you guys have been subscribed to my channel for a while, you saw that I did a bunch of Sundance reviews. I saw, I think, 10 movies or 11 movies during Sundance, including Judas and the Black Messiah. And I loved a lot of those films that I watched, especially Censor and Judas. And I really wanted to see Coda because I heard so many great things about it. Ended up, winning awards at Sundance, and just was one that I'd never caught at that time. And so I finally watched it on Apple TV Plus, and I can just completely add on to the hype for this movie. This movie is really, really good. It's very funny. It's one of the funniest movies I've seen all year, and although it does follow kind of familiar plot structure, that doesn't matter when you fall in love with the characters, and those plot cliches that you've seen a million times just works really well because it's so well directed, it's so well acted and performed by everybody in the cast, especially the main actress, but her entire family is just so well acted by all these deaf actors, and just the representation and all of that, because I have a lot of deaf families, so to see all of it's come together was really cool. I loved this film. It's honestly, it might be my favorite of the year, with a couple others up there, fighting for that top spot, but Coda is a must watch for everybody to watch. Alright, and the last one I'll be talking about on this video is The Protégé, starring Maggie Q and Samuel L. Jackson, and of course Michael Keaton in this movie. And this movie was fine. It was a perfectly fine action movie with some really solid action. But the best part of this movie was definitely Maggie Q and Michael Keaton. I loved their dynamic in this film, and I just wanted more of that because their back and forth was so entertaining throughout this entire movie. And I think if you were to watch this movie, yeah, sure, there's some cool action, but if you want some really entertaining acting between two great actors, it's really fun in this movie. I will say the plot is kind of convoluted, and you just kind of get lost in it, and you stop caring after a little while because you're watching these characters do these things, and you're watching Samuel L. Jackson, something happens to his character and then something else happens to his character, and I just really didn't like what they're doing with him in this movie. But really, Maggie Q and Michael Keaton keep this movie afloat to a point where I can, say it's a serviceable enough movie without them, and that's, chemistry that they had, that tension between those characters, in every sense of the word tension, was really, really well done. I just wish it was more focused on that rather than the more convoluted nature of this movie. But that is going to be it for my reviews here for all 10 of those movies. We got some animated, some action adventure, some spy movies, and some really great indie flicks mixed in with all of those. I really did enjoy talking about all of these movies. So if you guys enjoyed this video and want to see more things like this, throughout the year, where I just kind of review a bunch of things that I never got a chance to get around to, definitely subscribe to the channel, because I will do this probably like every 6 months or so, where I just, get overwhelmed with all the movies coming out, and so I decided to, take a week off and just talk about some older ones that I saw. So that's exactly what this video is, but I will get back right up to reviewing some movies that are new releases, like Dear Evan Hansen. I will be watching... Unfortunately, I will be watching it next week, so I will have a review up for that one as well as doing my 13 Days of Halloween starting in October, which I'm very excited to talk about. A bunch of horror movies, because that's my favorite genre, so I'm excited to get into that as well. But that is going to be it for me for this video, guys. So thanks everybody for watching and subscribing to the channel and commenting down below what you thought of all of these movies. So thanks guys for watching, and I hope to see you all in my next one.